What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Guys, just wanted to talk about some early surprises, for the Indianapolis Colts through the first couple weeks of the season. Again, there's a lot of things that can change. You're about to get into a much tougher stretch of games here for the Indianapolis Colts. So a lot of things could definitely change. But through the first 2 weeks, even though it's been up and down in a lot of different areas, the Colts are 1-1. And there is some good things to take away from what the Indianapolis Colts have done so far, and a couple things that you can talk about when it comes to some surprises. So let's go ahead and hop into it. First things first, I think you have to mention Anthony Richardson's play so far. Now, obviously, he's only played for so much. He didn't get to play in the second week, but I think that, and I mentioned this in another video as well, just seeing Anthony Richardson look through reads, complete passes that some people thought he wouldn't, and take control of an offense as early as he has, I think has definitely made me feel much more confident in his ability going forward than what I would have expected at the beginning of this year. Because there were a lot of people were wondering if Anthony Richardson was going to start at the beginning of the year at all. And here we are now with Anthony Richardson, definitely the bona fide starter. And then when you talk about just what he's been able to do in the short amount of time that he has played, I'd say a lot more people think there's a lot more good from Anthony Richardson than there is a lot more bad, which is ultimately the case. You want to see the development of Anthony Richardson continue to grow. And through the first couple weeks, I must say, I am surprised at how well Anthony Richardson is playing. I did not think he'd be completing over 60% of his passes. I did not think that Anthony Richardson would be able to throw and complete over 250 yards per game starting out right away. I did not think that Anthony Richardson would have more touchdowns than turnovers to start the year. At least I thought it'd be a lot closer. So I think from all intents and purposes in the stats, how he's handling things, all of that, I think you have to mention that it is definitely a good sign of relief to see Richardson starting off in a positive light. Another thing I'll mention is Shane Steichen's creativity. It has been a breath of fresh air to see the Colts having a whole new look offensively. It looks completely different than what it has in years past. And I think it is a breath of fresh air to realize that you have a coach who can devise new looks and the outcomes look like they're going to follow as long as we remain healthy with our QB and things continue to move in that direction. Now, I will mention, I think Shane Steichen needs to get better in the second half at being creative. I think that in the first quarter, Shane Steichen's creativity is on par with Andy Reid for the most creative things I ever see. But I mean, as the game goes on, I think Steichen needs to try to get a little more creative, especially in the second half with getting things done. But another thing of creativity is, remember in the Houston game when it was a 4th and 1 and the Colts originally looked like they were going to punt, and while substitutions were happening, the Colts threw their offense back out on the field and took the punt team off and forced the Texans to go out there with more guys on the field than they could have used and forced the Texans to use a timeout in the end. And that was something that is a type of play that coaching deserves credit for, because getting a team to use a timeout in a situation they don't want to is a very underrated aspect, and that's something that can really help you in later in games, and especially games that will end up being closer. So that's good to see Steichen taking advantage of that situation. I think the biggest surprise for me has been the trenches. The trenches are winning, guys, in multitude of fronts. The Colts offensive line, which I think is one of the most drastic changes, has definitely gotten a lot better. They have shown they can run the football. You now got Zach Moss back. You hope at some point Jonathan Taylor will come back. And this is showing that the Colts are able to run the football. I know the first week we saw that was rough. But at the same time, you also see the Colts signing Trey Sermon, right, to the team and putting him on the practice squad to learn. And when he gets a hold of this, I'm fairly certain that Trey Sermon's going to be your running back 2 until Jonathan Taylor would come back and would be running back 3. So it's kind of one of those situations. And until Evan Hall comes back, it's looking like that first week, it's more and more looking like Deion Jackson was the problem versus the offensive line being the biggest issue. Because obviously in the second week, the Colts offense looked much better. The running game looked much more effective, and that worked that way. But the biggest aspect has been the pass blocking. So far through basically 2 weeks, you've given up only 2 sacks versus, I think, the first 2 weeks last year. I'm fairly certain you gave up at least 7 sacks. So 7 versus 2, you're off to a much better start. The first week was not a great one for Will Fries, but it certainly wasn't terrible. But Will Fries and that unit this week played so much more effectively. They gave up no sacks on either Anthony Richardson or Gardner Minshew, and you were also able to run the football. They are winning in the offensive line. And you've seen now Will Fries and Ryan Kelly both this last week had the best PFF grade of anybody at their respective positions in week 2. And Bernard Ryman was a top guy last week in week 1 against Jacksonville. And so you're seeing the offensive linemen start to have, and actually even Ryan Kelly through the first 2 weeks has been PFF's best rated center of anyone in the league. So you're seeing this offensive line come together. It's a lot more cohesive now. It's starting to figure it out, which is great. Now we're going to have to see when they face a better front, if they're going to still be able to maintain good blocking in the pass and blocking for run blocking, because that's going to be the big punch, especially this week against Baltimore, who did the same thing to CJ Stroud as the Colts defense did. So, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to say the least. And of course, we have to talk about the other side for the trenches. That's the defensive line. I must say, I'm very impressed that we have, through the first 2 weeks, the Colts have 8 sacks through the first 2 weeks. I know they were supposed to do that. I mean, the Texans were very, very limited offensively, but that's what you're supposed to do when you have a bad offensive line facing a really good defensive line. Is you're supposed to get pressure. You're supposed to get 5-6 sacks in a game where the offensive line isn't good. In years past, I'd have said that probably wouldn't have mattered as much, but this time you're seeing the Colts defensive line really winning. Samson Ebukam is very effective. Kwity Paye is on the field right now, staying healthy and making plays. Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner killing it in the middle. And, of course, you have role guys in Tyquan Lewis, Dio Adangbo, Taven Bryan, who are out there making plays. And that's what you need for this team moving forward, is that kind of dominance on both sides of the ball when it comes to the trenches. And if the Colts can continue to do that, you will see this team stay in games. That's the big aspect. Kwity Paye has been a top 10 win percentage rusher so far. And like I said, with the attributes for the offensive line, the Colts are dominating in the trenches right now. So let's hope they continue to do that. The other thing I'll mention is Speed and Franklin. They're the new dynamic duo of this team, man. I mean, obviously, Shaq Leonard is still trying to get back to the player that he once was. He may be healthy now, but it has been some time since he has actually been healthy, like playing without injury healthy. And so he is still trying to get the strength and the trust in his body back. And he's not really hurting the Colts right now with his play, but he certainly isn't being a difference maker right now, like what we're seeing with Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. EJ Speed, who in week 1 had the best linebacker grade of any linebacker in the entire league. And then Zaire Franklin, who was a top 3 finalist in that, when he had 18 tackles and a forced fumble that led to a touchdown, and through 2 weeks has 31 tackles. The guy is off to an amazing start. Both of these guys off to an amazing start. They have really sunk into this Gus Bradley defense, and EJ Speed is looking extremely comfortable, and Zaire Franklin is picking up right where he left off in 2022, which is exactly what you need from your linebackers, and it has solidified this front seven. Has solidified it. Now, when it comes to honorable mentions to end this video, when it comes to surprises, no doubt a bad surprise has been the Jonathan Taylor issue, right? No one could have expected going into the beginning of 2023 that we would be having this issue with Jonathan Taylor and the contract disputes and the injury problem and all of this stuff. You certainly hope it will go away. Now, another thing is when it comes to Juju Brents, after Juju Brents was drafted, everyone presumed that Juju Brents was going to end up being the guy on the outside, but he has not even seen the field yet because of injuries in practice and the surgery and just not being mentally ready to start yet. We haven't seen him play yet. So that's been the biggest surprise, is you got all these guys in the draft at corner position, but Jalen Jones, Darius Rush, who is no longer on the team, and Juju Brents, none have seen the field yet. So it's quite interesting to see how that has changed from what we thought was going to happen. We hope that at some point those guys are going to get a chance to actually go out on the field and do something. But that's going to do it for this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts. What have been some of the biggest surprises for you so far through the first few weeks of the season going into 2023? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you guys so much again for all the support. And as always, go Colts.